in his book, The Psychology of Good and Evil, which I have here. See, it's not a small tome. Why children and adults in groups help and harm others. Our guest today, Dr. Ervin Staub, calls those who act in contexts of brutality heroic helpers. He says, they're the people who stand against oppressors and who make positive change in the world. He says, heroic helpers are not born. Through his work on reconciliation and violence prevention, Ervin Staub has become a heroic helper. He was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1938. He lived through the evil of the Nazi era there and came out a person interested in what makes us good. He was educated in Budapest and Vienna before attending the University of Minnesota for his bachelor's degree and Stanford University for his PhD in psychology. Professor Staub has taught at Harvard before becoming a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he is now Professor Emeritus of Psychology. He's also been a visiting professor at Stanford University and at the University of Hawaii, as well as at the London School of Economics. All nice places to be. He has numerous accomplishments and awards, and the one that may particularly interest you includes the other books he's written. For instance, Overcoming Evil, Genocide, Violent Conflict, and Terrorism, his most recent book published in 2011, and The Roots of Evil, Origins of Genocide and Other Group Violence. And I'll just show you, my reading of his book is so thoroughly underlined, and I use his other work in my teaching. Among his awards and honors, Professor Staub has been the president of the Society for Peace, Conflict, and Violence, Peace Psychology Division of the American Psychological Association, and the president of the International Society for Political Psychology. He has in the last year been the recipient of 2 very prestigious awards, and they include the Psychologist for Social Responsibility Anthony J. Marcella Prize for Psychology of Peace and Social Justice, where the citation in part reads, for many decades of academic scholarship and groundbreaking fieldwork addressing the issues of helping and altruism, bystander behavior, raising caring and nonviolent children, and the prevention of genocide. So I didn't know Professor Staub when we were on the faculty of the University of Massachusetts together in the 90s. He was one of those sort of senior people that one looked at in awe as they passed through campus, because he got teaching awards that some of us dreamed about, and was very prolific and productive. And I was just starting out. We do share an interest in coaching children's soccer, which he does, and has done. So in one of his books he says, we cannot expect bystanders to sacrifice their lives for others, but we can expect individuals, groups, and nations to act early along a continuum of destruction when danger to themselves is limited and the potential exists for inhibiting the evolution of increasing destructiveness. He wants passive bystanders to become active bystanders. Indeed, if we heed him, there would be no moral bystanders. So I just want you to know that he today lectured at the Boston University, and then tomorrow he'll be lecturing at Tufts. So he's squeezed us in, and I'm happy you've all come.
Thank you for the really lovely introduction. It's nice to come to a place like this where you are involved in one of the most important enterprises of our lives, which is to help children grow. I sometimes use the term raising children, but we really don't raise children. We facilitate and help them have experiences that lead them one way or another. This afternoon at BU, I talked about a little bit about the origins of violence between groups, and more about the prevention of violence and reconciliation. And one of the elements that I mentioned there, but I didn't talk about in any detail, is children. Helping children grow so that rather than become obedient followers, they become inclusively caring people, morally courageous people who, as a result, will be active bystanders, both in promoting positive relations, in promoting peace, and in resisting violence, and trying to limit violence. I was asked by my good friend Netta to talk a little bit about my own life experience, and I'm going to do that partly because she asked me, but partly also because it is that life experience that was really the original motivation for me to do the kind of work that I have been doing for many years. Actually, after I left Stanford, got my PhD, and started to do this kind of work, I kept away from thinking about how my life experience relates to this, because I was taught to be a serious empirical scientist. And as a serious scientist, you ask important questions, and you don't look and draw on your life experience. Well, most of us do, and in fact, it's a good thing to do because it gives us some extra motivation to do important things, hopefully. I will start talking a little bit, as I said, about my personal life and how that was a starting point. It was just a starting point because, as you will see even from this talk, talking about raising or helping develop morally courageous and caring children, everything evolves. Things change. So while my personal experience became a source of my motivation, once I began to do these things, it generated its own further evolution, and they became more and more committed. Just as rescuers, for example, people who endanger their lives to save other people when there are genocides, may start out sometimes somewhat hesitantly and agreeing to help one person, and once they do that, then they come to care more about the welfare of people whom they help. They come to see themselves as helpful people, and very often they do much more. So this is the starting. Here, just a few vignettes from my life. I was a 6-year-old child in Hungary in the worst of times, in 1944. In the summer of 1944, out of about 700,000 Hungarian Jews, or maybe 750,000, about 500,000 were taken to Auschwitz, and most of them killed immediately. And it wasn't just the Nazis who at that time, the Germans who occupied Hungary, because there were only about 50 German soldiers with the famous Eichmann who were in Hungary, but it was the Hungarians who allied themselves with them. Hungary was an ally of Germany from the beginning of the war, and they were significantly involved in gathering and collecting these people and getting them to Auschwitz. We had a woman live with us who was our maid. Middle-class families in Hungary all had maids. This woman came to live with my family 5 years before I was born, and she was the last surviving member of that generation. And after everybody else in that generation died, I continued to see her in Hungary, and actually, both luckily and sadly, I was there when she died. This woman took me and my little sister into hiding, took us to a Christian family. I remember walking down the street, and I remember walking in about the 3rd floor in the inner balcony of this house and walking into the apartment. I don't remember anything else. We stayed there for a while, and then my family managed, my aunt and my mother managed to get these so-called letters of protection from the Swedish embassy. You probably heard about Raoul Wallenberg. Raoul Wallenberg was a Swede. He's called a Swedish diplomat, but he was not originally a diplomat. He was a businessman, but he was asked, because he had a connection to Hungary, to come to Hungary and try to save lives after these approximately 500,000 people were already killed. And he came, and with great courage and determination and ingenuity, he did all kinds of things and saved the lives of many people. One of them was he created these so-called protective passes that said that after the war, these people will be under the protection. We'll move to Sweden, and so now they are under the protection of Sweden. And the Hungarian government agreed to respect 4,000 of these, but he created many more. The underground also made more, and a lot of people survived with them. He also bought some houses to which people with these passes could move into. Now, this wasn't a safe proposition, because there were continuous raids on these houses, and people were being taken away. So this woman, March, brought us back home after my aunt and my mother got these letters of protection. And I remember the night when we collected a few objects, put it on a little cart, and late at night we're pushing it to go to this protected house, very scared that anybody will encounter us on the street and that we could be at prey to whoever wants us to be made prey. So we went over to this house, and then the house was completely full of people. In the basement, mattresses were one side to the other. People were lying on mattresses. The house was completely full. My father and my uncle were both in forced labor camps. My uncle died in a forced labor camp. My father, his group was being taken from the camp where he was to Germany. And on the way, they made a stopover in Budapest. And during that stopover, he escaped. And he was the only survivor of that group. He knew where we were because this woman, March, went to the camp where my father was kept, went to the barbed wire fence, called out to someone and asked this person to call my father to come there. She handed my father a copy of this protective pass, but this actually was totally useless for him because for people at his age and under his circumstances, these things were not respected. But my mother and I later thought that nonetheless, he didn't know this, and this is what encouraged him. Because my father was a good man, but was not a brave man. And this was a very unusual act for him, and a very fortunate act. He escaped. He knew where we were because Much told him, came to the house, and he was hiding in that house for the rest of the time before the Russians, the Soviet army came in. I told you that there were continuous raids on the house. One of these times that I remember very clearly, I was standing in the window and I saw a group of men in black uniforms marching down the street. And I shouted, "They are coming." And I ran to the door of the apartment and looked out from the kind of mezzanine, and I saw the door to the apartment house opening and these people coming in. So I don't know whether my mother had this plan before or whether she made this up on the moment. And by that time we graduated to a first floor apartment where there were 8 of us. The apartment belonged to an old woman who was sick, lying in bed, and there were 8 of us staying in the apartment. My father sat down in the corner of a room. My mother pushed a chair over him, an armchair, and threw a blanket over the armchair. And these people came in, searched everything in the house, but didn't look under the chair. So my father survived. My March, in addition to doing these other things, would make dough, put it in a baby carriage, and take it to a bakery. to be baked for all the people in the house. We had very little food. Once she was stopped by neighborhood Hungarian Nazis, the Arrow Cross, they were called. They asked her, "Are you helping Jews?" And she said, "No, I'm not." And they believed that she was. They made her stand at the wall with her hands up for a long time. She thought they are going to kill her. But another man came in who knew her from the neighborhood. This was all in the same general neighborhood where we originally lived, and told them, "She's a good woman, let her go." And they did. And she continued to do what she was doing before. After the war, we had this small business where my parents, my family made trousseaux for people. And we had to close down the business under the Nazis, and there were a few objects before we moved, so my mother gave these objects to some people to keep it for us. We came back, and everybody except one person, I think, said it was taken by the Russians, it was taken by the Germans. My mother, over the years, saw tablecloths and other things in the superintendent's apartment, in our apartment house. At Stanford, I started to think about some way to do research on people helping others, on active bystandership. I didn't use the term yet. And the beginning was very simple. As I told you, I was trained to be an empiricist, an empirical scientist, and I believe in research. I do, except that I believe in research using as many tools as possible to address a problem. So I thought, well, I'm going to study sharing behavior. And I can give a child a certain amount of candy, and we can measure the weight of the candy, and then afterwards, when they have an opportunity to share, we will measure again the candy and so much, how much was left. And so we studied reciprocity in sharing. And from there I moved on to study emergency help. What happens when you sit in a room, you hear a crash, a sounds of distress from another room. Some other people began to do this research, this procedure, but I had all kinds of questions that I wanted to ask. And one of the things that we did was we studied age changes in this kind of helping. What we found was that, not surprisingly, helping increases from kindergarten to first grade, from first grade to second grade, remains at about the same level in second grade, and then declines in sixth grade to about the level of kindergartners. And we wondered what's going on. And we started to interview the children who participated in this study. And we asked, why did you do what you did? Or why didn't you go into the other room? Or whatever. And they would say things like, well, we thought somebody would get mad. Who? Well, the person in charge. Or, I didn't think I was supposed to go into another room. And so I began to think that one of the things that happens is that children learn rules of appropriate conventional behavior, and these rules inhibit them at times when there are more important values that should enter. So we did another study in which we had some children work in a room on a drawing, 7th graders. We had some other kids individually, one at a time, work on a drawing, and we told them, there are some drawing pencils in the other room. If you need more drawing pencils, you can go into the other room and get some. That was the permission condition. And then we told the other kids, there is somebody else in the other room, please don't go into the other room. So what happens? The children who were told nothing, and the children who were told not to go into the other room, had almost none at all. So not giving children information was the same as prohibition, in line with what I said before. The children who were told that you couldn't go into the other room, almost all of them helped. One of the scenes was dramatic because I happened to be watching at this time. I wasn't always there. I had research assistants. And there was this girl listening to the sounds of distress, not doing anything. And I thought she wouldn't do anything anymore because kids who have usually had Ervin. Then she picked up one drawing pencil, broke the edge of it on a table, picked up another drawing pencil, broke the edge of that, and then ran into the other room. Now, we did a lot of other research that I could tell you about, but let me talk to you in more general terms. What are some of the conditions required for children to become caring and helpful, and also inclusively caring? What do you mean by that? What I mean by that is that children can learn to care about the welfare of people right around them, their family, even their group, but learn to draw a line at the edge of their group so that the caring doesn't extend to other people, especially doesn't extend to people whom you have learned to devalue. So, in order to develop caring, children need warmth and nurturance. Sure. Why is that important? If you have an affectionate, loving relationship with important people who take care of you, you learn to see people in a positive light. You learn to trust people. So you are more likely to orient to other people that way. But warmth and affection is not enough. Children also need positive guidance. They need rules that guide them, to tell them that it's important to care about others, important to do certain things, but they also need the values on which the rules are based. Values about respecting human beings, their well-being, their welfare, and so on. Values about justice and all that. In order for this to work, it's not enough to communicate principles and values and rules. You also have to get children to act according to them. Because otherwise, they don't really take it in and make it their own and come to guide their own behavior according to them. So it's very important to actually get children to act according to those values. Well, that means that this can require firm but not punitive discipline. Being harsh and being punitive with children does not lead to caring, does not lead to seeing people in a positive light, does not lead to trusting people. So it's very important for whatever firm guidance is used, that it not be punitive and harsh. And I will come back to that later on. I have done research on another thing that I think is very important, and that is learning by doing. That is getting children to actually engage in positive behavior. When we do things, this applies also to negative behavior, hostility and violence. It applies to positive behavior. As I mentioned, we learn and change as a result of their own actions. When we help someone, we come to see the welfare of those people we help as more important. We come to see ourselves as helpful people, and we are more likely to continue to take positive action. I have done a series of studies in which we had children, many years ago, in which we had children engage in a variety of different kinds of positive behavior. Older children teaching younger children. Children making toys for poor hospitalized children. And some others. And while the findings are a little bit complex, it's clear that when children have helped others, they are more likely to help later than children who had other activities that did not involve helping. What do I mean by complex? For example, one of the ways that we ask them to help is to write letters to poor hospitalized children. Well, we were working with 6th grade boys, and 6th grade boys at that time in the schools that we were working in do not write letters. So you have to have the right measure to evaluate helpfulness. On the other hand, when we had kids gather interesting materials that would be enjoyable for these kids so that they would have a better way to spend their time, then both boys and girls would do those things. So also in some of our things that we did, boys in the short run reacted with, I think, resistance. They didn't like to be moved in a certain direction. But when you let some time pass, a few weeks later, and you studied how they behaved, then what we did showed up in their behavior. So they learned the things, but they didn't immediately incorporate it in their behavior, but they did it at a later time. There is another thing about learning by doing. So, for example, teaching younger children, older children teaching younger children. It clearly had a positive effect on later health behavior. But the positive effect was greater when the interaction between the older child and the younger child was more positive. When there was difficulty in that interaction, then the older kids still, they moved in a positive direction, but not as much. And that makes sense, right? I mean, if what we are doing is somewhat frustrating, we are less likely to change from that. As I said, we draw the line between us and others. And the issue, the challenge of overcoming devaluation and helping children learn to care about the other is a very important one. How can we do that? We can do this by what we say. So for example, one of the things that seems to lead to positive behavior is pointing out to children and young people, I use children very generally of course, the consequences of their behavior on other people. Telling kids and probably adults to be good, do this to be good, is less effective than telling them what are the consequences of their behavior on other people, how that makes the other person feel, how that diminishes or enhances their welfare, and all that. So doing that in relation to people outside the group is very important. Positive contact has tremendous value. You probably know this, but after desegregation, in many schools, different groups of children did not engage with each other. They kept separate, and people were concerned about that. So they introduced cooperative learning techniques. One of this was the so-called jigsaw technique. 6 kids in a mixed group would work together on the same task. And each of them had to learn something and had to teach it to the others in order to be able to accomplish the task. So in the course of that, each child is a teacher of others and a learner from others, and there is significant meaningful interaction. And this had very positive effects in terms of kids' attitudes towards each other and resulting in more interaction among them, and more positive interaction. You know, another element in this is, how do the parents behave in relation to the other? Rescuers during the Holocaust, people who endanger themselves and their families to save lives, often came from families in which the parents engaged more with people not belonging to the dominant majority group. So, Polish Catholics would engage more with non-Polish Catholics, including Jews. The children saw this and experienced these positive relations between their parents and the others, and that communicates a huge amount, seeing that. I mean, think of it, we communicate something about the other in a million different ways. Think about a parent walking down the street with a child, holding a child's hand. The child sees a poor person sitting at the side of the road, you know, asking for something. The child wants to move towards that person, and the parent holds the child's back and moves on. Think of what the child learns from such a simple action, and from many of them. And think of what the child can learn from the opposite of this. Positive models are very important. I talked about rescuers just now, and many of the rescuers report that one of their parents was a humanitarian person who tried to help other people in a variety of ways. We have a lot of research also in university settings which show that when you show models who are positive characters and do positive things, children are likely to follow them. The role of negative models is also very important. Think of a school where kids harass each other, there is intimidation, there is what we now call bullying. And most people are passive bystanders around it. What does that teach each child? It tells children, not only those who are the victims of bullying or harassment, but also the bystanders, that people are dangerous and other people don't care. Very powerful and sad kinds of learnings. I have done at one point an evaluation in a whole school system, in the Belchertown school system, of all the positive and negative behaviors that take place among kids. And of course, there is quite a bit of harassment and intimidation. Kids who reported that they were harassed and intimidated, and everybody is at some point in time, so I'm talking about kids who reported it more, and who also reported that others took positive action trying to stop it. Others were active bystanders, reported more positive feelings about the school and about their lives at the school, about their experience in the school, than kids who reported the same amount of harassment but did not report others responding in these active ways. One other thing that I want to mention is that in studying kids describing the emotions, the feelings that they have about their life at the school, the kids who had the most negative feelings were not the kids who were the objects of harassment and intimidation. They were the kids who reported the least amount of behavior directed towards them. We looked at the 20% of the kids who had the least negative or positive behavior directed at them. So these kids simply were not included. And they reported the worst experience about their life at school. So let me talk just a little bit about the impact of being harmed. I mentioned this already briefly, or I mentioned this afternoon when I gave that other talk. One of those times I mentioned it. And that is that children feel, people who are harmed feel vulnerable and see the world as dangerous. And also see other people as hostile. Somebody did a bunch of studies with children with aggressive boys. And these boys had reported harsh treatment at home in their families. And apparently the harsh treatment and also the lack of skills that they developed, that they didn't develop the kind of social skills that are necessary for positive interaction, partly because they weren't socialized effectively that way. They saw other kids as hostile. So when they were asked to look at various scenes in which something happened, which other kids judged an action that harmed someone as unintentional, as accidental, they judged it as hostile. And they judge the appropriate reaction on their part as retaliation. So healing from these experiences is very important. And really creating opportunities for kids to heal, to talk about their experiences with empathic others, and other ways of healing. And, depends on the circumstances. Genocide, after genocides, survivors need to heal in many different ways. Through commemorations that focus also on a positive future, and so on. I want to mention a concept that I have been working with now for a number of years. At some point, I began to see and have people report that they have suffered greatly, and because they have suffered, they don't want other people to suffer that way. They want to help people who have suffered, and they want to do what they can to prevent others suffering. And as I looked at it, and as I looked at examples of it, and there are memoirs, autobiographies, reports in the media about people and so on, who have suffered greatly, and then go on to do amazing things. A woman writing an autobiography, whose mother died when she was a child, who had an abusive, drunk and abusive father, who was raped by people, who was put into an orphanage from which she escaped, who married a man who beat her. And then she got out of that, and then she went to Vietnam to create an orphanage for children and helped children in very significant ways. So I started to look at this, and we also, together with one of my graduate students, looked at this. There was no direct research on it. We did one study that was a little surprising. But we also looked at a lot of reports about people who have been greatly harmed, where the reports didn't look at this, but there was some accidental information there. And so we deduced from that a number of experiences that can help people transform their suffering into caring and empathy and positive behavior. And if you want to look at that, I don't have time to describe it, but if you want to look at that, you can find an article about it on my website, www.ervinstaub.com. So let me go on and talk a little bit about developing moral courage. What is moral courage? It's the courage to act on positive moral values in the face of opposition and of potential negative and harmful consequences to yourself. So it requires moral values. Not all moral commitments, in my view, are moral courage, because people can have very powerful commitments to things that they consider moral that are actually highly destructive. So it's not just, for me, a matter of the definition by a person of what is moral. I'm going to go off and kill all these other people because if I do them, that's going to create a better world. Not that. So, how does moral courage develop? The answer to that is, this is a domain which is very important, and we have very little firm knowledge about it. But I have some views on this. One of them is that when you get young people to participate in decision making, to discuss the values and rules to live by at the home and in the school, they learn to find their voice. They learn that their voice has value. And they are more likely to use their voice later on. when we also encourage children to act on their values and empathic feelings, then again, they can also learn that they have power and they can make a difference. Now, this is a complicated matter because we are all protective of our children, right? If our children speak or act on their values, even though there are potential and likely negative consequences of some sort, we want to protect them. Not my little boy or my little girl. I totally understand it. I have children, I have grandchildren. The issue is to measure risk. The issue is to consider what is reasonable for a child to do and where is the limit. And to actually empower them to take reasonable risks, to speak and act on their values. Because that's how they are going to become the kind of people that most of us want our children to become. The issue of relationship to authority is important. I was talking about warmth and protection early on. In many societies, children are raised, and in many families, children are raised with firm rules. You are supposed to follow the rules. These are the rules. Don't question. There is no reasoning. There is no discussion around it. This is how we do things. So what you learn is obedience to authority. What you learn is an authoritarian orientation where you submit yourself to the authority of others, but you also want others to submit themselves to your authority, depending on where you are in the position of hierarchy or pecking order. So it goes both ways. And one of the things that does not happen is for people to learn to use their own judgment about matters. And use what I call ethical consciousness and ask, what is the reality here? What is important here? What are the values that apply? How do I want to act in these situations? And so this business of working with and developing an appropriate, reasonable, moderate relationship to authority. Yes, respect authority, respect legitimate authority. People who use their authority in legitimate ways. The business about moral courage is that people gain confidence, kids gain confidence in their ability to act when they engage. Now, some of the things that from these practices people learn, kids, adults, is caring values, they can develop empathy, and they can develop what I call, this is a mouthful, a pro-social value orientation. I have studied this, I have measured this in my research, I have looked at it, and stuff is a positive view of human beings, a concern about others' welfare, and especially important, a personal feeling of responsibility for others' welfare. It's not only that we need to be concerned about others' welfare, I am concerned about others' welfare. People who have such an orientation, we found more helpful in response to an emergency, more helpful in response to someone's psychological distress, more constructively rather than blindly patriotic. That is, people who believe that because I love my country, I should do whatever I can to speak out when my country doesn't live up to important human values or its own important own values. And also, it was negatively related to aggressiveness in boys. By that I mean is that boys who were more aggressive had less of this pro-social value orientation. So this seems very important. But I also found that when this is combined with a feeling of competence, with a belief that I can influence others' welfare, these two things add up, and people are more helpful. So the combination of this orientation and the belief that I can make a difference is extremely valuable and important. And see, the thing about all this is, I want to add something that's not on that slide, and that is the power of bystanders. In many situations, it's amazing how even a single person can make a difference. I mentioned this afternoon, Ron Ridenour. You don't know about Ron Ridenour, probably, but he is the man on account of whom we know about what happened in My Lai. As you probably know, at My Lai, American troops went into these villages believing that they are going to find the enemy there. There was no enemy, and they killed somewhere between 300 and 500 women, children, and old men. Ron Ridenour trained with some of the soldiers who were there and heard about this. And he couldn't rest. He endangered himself, first of all, by finding a witness who refused at that time to kill. And because of that, he had all kinds of problems. He found this person and he learned more about it. Then he went back home and told his family that he's going to try to do whatever he can for the American people to find out about it. And his family told him, forget it. It's not your business. That it didn't rest. He wrote hundreds of letters, congressmen, to other people. And then finally, Mo Udall started congressional hearings. Seymour Hersh started to write articles about it, and we all learned about it. And I believe that that made a difference. So even single bystanders can make a difference. I have been engaged in various activities of training people to be active bystanders. And, you know, every one of us can, by what we say in a situation, call others' attention to it, and define for them the meaning of the situation and the appropriate action. I did a study many years ago in which two people sat together in a room, hearing a crash and sounds of distress. One of the two people was my co-worker, not a real participant. The other one was a real participant. They were both working on a task. That was the crash and sounds of distress. My co-worker would say one of a variety of different things. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's another experiment. I don't think it has anything to do with us. That sounds bad. Maybe we should do something, but remain safe. That sounds bad. Maybe we should do something. You go in and see what happened, and I go and find the person in charge and leave him through another door. The percentage of time the other person had ranged from 25% to 100%. 25% when she said, probably has nothing to do with us, 100% in the last situation that I described. We have great power. Now, that great power doesn't always work. Not everybody will. But we can create alliances. We can join with others. We can work together. And that can be a response to a particular situation. That can be kids, when they see harassment and intimidation in the school, rather than directly intervening, turning to another, turning to each other, and then together doing something. And the something can be supporting the person who's being harmed. That has a powerful effect. If rather than joining in or standing passively or laughing, you embrace the person who is being harmed and say, you know, this shouldn't be happening, I'm really sorry. Don't you think that would be powerful? That is powerful? So, anyway, let's go to this summary here. We all have these profound psychological needs. We have material needs, we all know that, right? But we have psychological needs for security, for a positive identity, for feeling effective in the world so that we can make a difference, for connections to other people, and for understanding the world around us and our place in it. The more we can help children fulfill these needs constructively rather than destructively, the more they are likely to move in a positive direction. What is destructive in fulfillment? I make myself feel powerful and effective by giving up someone. Well, it's destructive in two ways. It harms somebody else, but it also affects my relationships to other people. It's not only destructive for others, it's also destructive for me. Or I feel powerless, so I'm going to try to control everything. I tell other people what to do and how to do it. I may feel now effective and in control, but of course it negatively affects my relationships to others and it's not pleasant to others. So helping children and people is not applies to adults. Everything that I said also applies to adults in various ways, most of them. Constructively, and develop skills to fulfill these needs constructively, and all that. And you know, this all relates to the question, how do we develop a caring society? It's partly a matter of values. I was talking about caring values, I was talking about various things, justice, empathy, but you know, we live in a society that focuses very much on individual achievement, individual rights, and competition. I think that there's nothing wrong with individual rights are very important, respecting individual rights. Achievement, there is nothing wrong with achievement. But how we balance that with cooperation and community is a core question, not to go off the beam with achievement. To create just systems, one of the sources of conflict between groups that can begin a road towards violence between them is great inequality between the dominant superordinate group and the less powerful group. How to create more just systems, economically, more just institutions, so that the institutions operate positively. Pluralism, fulfilling basic needs, a supporting society, and also a healing society. What do I mean by that? Look, some of us have traumatic experience, but all of us have what I call life injuries. You have a best friend, and you live here, and your friend moves to California. You are 7 years old, let's say, and your friends move to California. That's the end of best friendship, because really, how long is that going to last from that distance? Somebody very important to us dies, suddenly, unexpectedly, and a million others. You really like someone, and that person doesn't seem to like you. You fall in love, but it is unrequited. So these injuries, so creating environments and societies where we can be with each other in a supporting way, that we can be there in a way that we don't turn the pain against ourselves and against each other, but use it constructively, is also very important. And I have definitely spoken long enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to take questions, if you have any. Yes.
I'm impressed by how a positive environment and a positive role model can foster growth. But you must have also some experience of less positive role models. I don't know if your maid, for example, grew up in an authoritarian circumstance, or if she was a bystander watching injustice, or is there hope in a world where there's some sort of pessimism, or do we need original goodness?
Well, there is a lot of suffering in the world, and often it leads people to be negative and hostile and aggressive towards others, and to be highly competitive because they see limited resources, and everybody is fighting for this. They don't think that much, actually, most people, in terms of psychological resources, which are very important. You know, I mentioned this afternoon, least one important good thing that Roosevelt did. He did others also. He didn't do all good things. And that is to create these work programs that not only helped people with their livelihood, but told people that we are a community, that we belong together, we don't forget about it. So there are many negative environments and many negative consequences, violence by individuals, violence by groups. But that woman you are mentioning is an example of altruism born of suffering, I think, among other things. Her mother died at a very early age. Her father remarried. She had a stepmother who was very cruel to her. She did something, whatever, she was her own child, she didn't know what. The stepmother made her kneel on dry corn for hours. That was very painful, and just treated her badly. And at a very young age, she was sent out to be a servant to other people. Now, one of the things about her was, I think, the transformative things is that her connections to children were very positive. I never thought about this until this moment. The children whom she cared for in various families loved her and responded to her. And that was probably because she also had these elements of goodness. And that's very healing. That's very healing. When young people in general, respond to you in a loving and caring way, that is healing. So she became an altruist and she became a hero. And really, she inspired me more than anybody else. And she was about 89. I was in Hungary, and the three of us had dinner together, and her head was shaking. And I said to her, you know, much of what I do in the world is because of you. And this was a very modest woman that her head was shaking. And she said,
Well told. Thank you.
Any other questions? You know everything.
So you mentioned early on about how children's moral behavior sort of starts to regress, if you will, at a certain age. So what are the theories about why that happens, or is it really just enculturation? And is there an ideal age that, you know, or good age at which to teach these very young children, you know, maybe some of the concepts you've been talking about are actually really difficult to discuss?
I think that we teach children primarily through experience, not so much through concepts. Although, yes, concepts too, in that, you know, and I explained to you how it works. There is research that shows that at age 3, children show more empathy to other kids when their parents do this with them. And they don't always just express it in a very nice, loving way. They can get angry because the child does something. They don't punish the child, they don't hit the child, they don't do anything, but they have emotion if the child did something especially problematic. And that's great because that's you don't want to be emotional so that you overwhelm a child. But you know, for the child to see that you have feelings, and those feelings relate to harm done to another person, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So you teach through experience. So this is an experience too, when a child does something and you really say, you know, that was such and such. And you can also do it in the positive direction. Oh, yeah, you did such and such. But I forgot the first part of your question. I don't think I answered the first part.
So
why they become less? Yes. Yeah. Now, I don't know if it is only the socialization into rules of appropriate behavior. It can also be that kids become more self-conscious as they move to a certain age. And so they look more at their behavior in a social setting. One of the interesting things is people have found in a lot of research that the larger the number of people present, the less likely that anyone will have a so-called bystander. One of the rare exceptions, or maybe the only exception to this, comes from my research, and that was replicated. In the same study, we had either a child alone or two children together in a room hearing these sounds of distress. In first and second grade, kindergarten, first and second grade, I don't know if I was second grade, certainly third, first grade, when that happens, the kids spontaneously begin to talk to each other. What's that? What do you think? And so as they talk to each other, they move to help. They join forces. And by the very talking about it, they know that. As people, older people, put on a poker face in a social situation. Something happened, but I look unconcerned. I may look, but I look unconcerned. You look around, everybody looks unconcerned. I don't need to do anything. That's why I'm saying that we can define the meaning of a situation for each other by the way we react. So it may be some of this self-consciousness that also stops kids already a little older to not to express their feelings in response to something. It may also be these rules that kids learn, that proper behavior. And the problem is there's nothing wrong with teaching them proper behavior, but we need to teach them that certain values supersede, or certain rules, if you want, to supersede these other rules of conventional behavior. So the welfare of a person, when there is an issue around that, and acting to help that person supersedes to not making waves, not going to the other building, not stopping your work. So, yes.
As you talk, I'm thinking about how a lot of these pieces about helping others also relate to children engaging in self-advocacy, because I think that there are children who also won't stand up for themselves or put limits around what's acceptable for what they accept from the environment around themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really, actually, a really important issue. The issue of it's right and moral to speak for others.